Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's Farmers Insurance Open. Gonna go through both venues, the North and South course over there at Torrey Pines, and make sure you know everything you need to know going into this week to put in your lineups. Go out there, put some outright bets in, but cover key stats, comp courses, a little hole-by-hole breakdown of the South course, all the important information to go out there and get your research started. So a lot to get into here. Let's first start off with some of the course specifics over there at the North and South course. Like I mentioned off the bat, we have two tracks this week. So the main course is going to be the South course at Torrey Pines, and then the course that they see for one of the first two rounds is going to be the North course, and also the much more scoreable of the two 18-hole setups. And a lot of the difficulty with the South course comes down to lush rough that's usually 4 inches plus, and on top of that, a course that is nearly 8,000 yards, right? It's listed at 7,765 yards, but it does play a little bit longer with some of the elevation changes. And on top of that, you've got small slopey greens, and year in, year out, this plays as one of the more difficult tracks on the PGA Tour, despite being a par 72, which is pretty rare, right? Normally the more difficult tracks on tour tend to be par 70s because of the lack of par 5s, but even those holes around Torrey Pines aren't as straightforward as you'd be hoping for. So it's a true ball striking test. When we go hole by hole, you'll get a good idea for why that's going to be the case. But over here at the the North course, I should say, it's a lot more scoreable. It's more so meant for municipal play. I'm out there for me and you to go out there and have a good round. It's only about 7,258 yards. Again, a par 72, different type of agronomy setup as well. The same length of rough, but much wider fairways, much less slopey greens, and you're going to get rounds around there of like 6, sometimes even 7 or 8 under par. So if you're going to go low, if you're going to go out there and post something in the low 60s, it's going to be over here on the North course. Unfortunately for players, they only get that in one of their 4 rounds. So rather than a 54-hole cut like we had at the Amex, it's just going to be a 2-round normal cut situation with 1 round coming on the North and of course the other one coming on the more difficult South course. What we're going to focus on is the South course for a majority of our modeling this week. The North course, I'd say pretty much any skill set can get it done. It's a shorter par 72, real flat greens, all that kind of stuff. So you'll see a lot of good putters excel there. You'll see some bombers, some ball striking players go out there and go low. Whereas at the South course, there's really one kind of skill set that we're looking for. And anytime you have a course that's nearly 8,000 yards, it's got that real lush rough out there. So green complexes that are nasty, right? We need ball striking first type of players. They've played some of the biggest events in the world around at Torrey Pines because it is that ball striking test that you're looking for in championship golf. A few reasons for that. You've got these Poa Nua greens, which are perfect out there, but throughout the day do get a little bit bumpier. A lot of those 8-10 footers, which are usually 50-50s on the PGA Tour, are made at a lower rate, I should say, around Torrey Pines. So you've got some tough greens, a lot of that because of the slope, also because of that Poa can be a little bit bumpy later in the day. The rough is a ryegrass overseed. It's listed at 4 inches, but at spots, it's going to play closer to like 4.5, 5 inches. Year in and year out, it is some of the toughest rough to get out of, and only the strongest, highest ball speed players have found success getting out of that kind of rough. So it's a difficult track. The fairways around the South course are extremely narrow corridors. They also have quite a bit of slope to them, so even when you hit the fairways, a lot of times you'll roll out and into the rough, which is why we have such low fairway percentages. So over here in Bet the Number, of course, guys, a partner of the channel, where we can look at the last 3 years data, you'll see that the fairway percentage is only 52%, which is a whole 7% lower than your tour average. That is a sizable gap right there. Your green to regulation percentage is only just lower than what you have there at 65.7%, which is interesting. You've got some long irons in hand, but that shows you that the greens are at least somewhat receptive year in and year out. But the scrambling rate, right, lower than average. You got those fast, slopey greens to worry about. Your putting percentages, you can see your 3-putt percentage is higher than your tour average here. A lot of that because of how difficult the green complexes can be. And when we're looking at our birdies and bogeys per round, right, 3.48, right, lower in terms of a birdie average compared to your average on tour. And then over here with your bogeys per round, significantly higher than what we're used to seeing. A lot of that because of how difficult the ball striking test can be, but also just the sheer length of the golf course, right? Rather than what you had at the Sony Open or at the Amex on a lot of the holes, you're not going to have scoring wedges in hand very often. Par fives, right, if you're laying up, you can set up that kind of opportunity, but outside of just a few isolated chances every round, you're not going to have that same kind of, 370 kind of par four. So it's a difficult track, one where you don't see very low scores. Last year, Max Homa hardly got to rate about, 10 under par. When it plays more difficult, like what you had last year, you're going to get a winner between, let's say, 9 and maybe 13 under par. When it's a little bit easier, sometimes you see something like 16 to 18 under par. So it'll all depend on the wind speeds. It'll depend on how soft the golf course is going to be. And I do have to say, they're getting a huge amount of rain here on a Monday. Apparently, it looks like an absolute lake out there on a few golf holes. So it's going to play a little bit softer, I'd have to imagine, this time around. But that means the rough is going to be even harder to hit out of, probably going to grow even more than what it was going to before. And on top of that, the green complexes are tiny, right? They're tiny targets. If you're missing in that rough around the green, it's going to lead to even a lower scrambling rate than what we've had in years past. So the weather's a huge impact. Because it is a coastal golf course, you also tend to get some winds that can kick up in the afternoon. So if it ends up being a windier kind of week, it's when you can see like a 2-3 over par scoring average around the Torrey Pines South course. North course, right, is usually playing about 1-2 under par, but when the winds kick up, sometimes it even plays slightly over par itself. So it's a course that is susceptible to the weather. It's already a difficult track to begin with. And anytime we have, and these are nearly US Open type conditions, right? When it's hard to hit fairways, your scrambling rate's low, you have fast greens, firm greens. In some years, right, we go out there to Torrey Pines, you see these ball strikers towards the top of the board. So if you look at last year's leaderboard, look at all that dark green over there in the approach tab. The putting tabs, what you'd expect for the top of a leaderboard, but even around the green, look at this, right? A lot of green up there that we're not used to seeing. It's a way different beast than what we've had for the Century, the Sony, the Amex, where we were looking for birdie or better percentage type of players. Putters were towards the top of our heap. It's not necessarily going to be the case this week. So now we're going to go hole by hole, give you an idea of why it's such a big ball striking test. But when we get to the custom modeling section, we go through some of our key stats. It's going to be much more about this approach play, even the off the tee play, than what you see with a lot of the other tracks we've covered. From the overhead views here, you'll probably get a good idea of just how narrow these fairways are, but also where some of the difficult around the green shots will come from. So first off, this is a 450-yard hole, little dogleg from left to right. You can see it's about a 15-20 yard wide fairway, protected by some pretty gnarly fairway bunkers. So it's pretty much giving you the taste for Torrey Pines right off the bat. You miss in the fairway are these bunkers. You're probably actually going to want to be in the bunkers this week because of how deep that rough will be, and trying to get into a tiny green. So it's a pretty typical par 4, right? It's not nearly the scoring look that you're going to get at some of the other tracks we've played here in 2024. If you hit a good tee shot, right, it is a 450-yard hole. You might be leaving yourself a pitching wedge or a 9-iron in if you're one of those bombers, but you've got to hit this narrow fairway, right? So if you're somebody that's long and straight, this is the kind of golf course that will reward you for that. But when you have such narrow targets to hit, not a lot of people are going to hit those fairways, right? As you see with that 55% fairway percentage. Hole number 2 is 392. Again, a slight dogleg from left to right. There's obviously no trees to block you out, so it's pretty much a straightforward hole. Once again, pretty narrow landing area, maybe a little bit bigger in hole 2. And this is more of a scoring look, right? 392 is about as short as it's going to get out here at the Torrey Pines South course, and definitely one you want to look to take advantage of. Hole 3 is a longer par 3. It's 201 yards, exposed to the wind out here, so you'll see quite a few shots knocked out of the air by that coastal wind. But a pretty straightforward hole, right? Little bunker in front. It's a narrow green, so you have to be spot on with your distance control to hold the surface. But if it's going to play a little bit softer this year, maybe it isn't as much of a problem, with seeing shots hitting the green and bouncing over, but still a pretty small target to hit out there. Hole 4 is 489, a beefy par 4 around Torrey Pines. You can see you have that little ravine down the left, so you don't want to miss to that side. A lot of the bailouts are over here in the right in these bunkers, and it's a beefy hole, right? You hit it in those bunkers, you've got like 200 yards to this tiny green, and these around the green shots aren't simple, right? You can see the green is slightly elevated compared to the rest of the landscape. You've got the long rough over the back to keep you from going down into the ravine down there. The beach, as you can see on this overhead view, and these bunkers around the green have some decent depth to them as well. So that's why that scrambling percentage is so low. You can't really get perspective for how much slope there are on these surfaces, but I can tell you that there's quite a bit on pretty much every green there. Hole number 5 is 457. It's another one of those medium length par 4s that is a potential scoring look if you can hit the fairway, right? Probably leaving you like an 8, maybe a 7 iron in, as a lot of players will hit a 3-wood off of this tee, or just take a driver and maybe tone back a little bit off of it. But if you're long and straight, right, you can hold the surface. In theory, you could take advantage of this hole, but you're going to see a lot of people, right, missing in these fairway bunkers. And yeah, honestly, you're not going to see a lot of rough shots here, right? Unless you just run through the fairway and you end up in that first cut. A lot of your misses are going to be in those bunkers on hole 5. Hole 6 is 562, dogleg from left to right, ravine on the right side, but these players are long enough to take it out of play. They're more so worried about these fairway bunkers to the left. If you avoid them, you should be able to get it up near the green in 2, even if you're in that 4-inch rough. But if you hit the fairway, this is an eagle look, right? You're going to have, about 230, maybe 240 yards into this complex. It's a small green complex, but if you get it on the surface, you're not going to have anything more than a 30-footer for eagles. So it's one where you're rewarded for your ball striking. It is actually one of the flatter greens that you have on this property, but it's a tiny one out there, tiny target. If you hit it, you're rewarded though. Hole 7 is 465, little dogleg from left to right. Once again, the main worry here is hitting it in these fairway bunkers. Missing to the right does put you behind this little tree, but it's not nearly as tall as some of the palm trees, some of the big pine trees that we've had over the last few weeks. So you can hit a little cut around it if you're too close to it. If you have enough room, you can launch it over that tree. But the rough over here to the right kind of dictates your shot, right? If you get a shitty lie, a lot of times you might even have to lay up because you're not confident you'll get it over that tree. It's a deceivingly difficult hole, right? 465 doesn't look terrible from the overhead look, but it's a tricky one out there. Hole 8 is 177, one of the shorter par 3s on site. Tiny green though, right? I mean, look how narrow these par 3s are, right? You saw the same thing with the first par 3 that we encountered. You didn't have much depth to work with. Now, because it's potentially going to be a little bit softer with the rain they've gone, might help out the players a little bit, but still, that's why these Torrey Pines par 3s are hard as they are. Hole number 9 is 617, a long par 5. Only your longest players on tour are really going to think about reaching this in 2. And if it's going to play softer this time, right, a little bit less rollout in the fairways, it's going to be even more difficult to reach in 2. So you got to hit the perfect tee shot. You've got to hit it out there a country mile to even think about going about this in 2. And on top of that, it's a real difficult shot in. Hole 10, so if you're starting on the back, is also about the same length as hole number 1, straightforward little par 4. But once again, if you hit a good tee shot, get it in that fairway, long and straight type of player, it's a scoring look. But if you get out of position, you're looking at bogey on hole number 1. 11 is 225, so a longer par 3. Once again, just a tiny green complex. A little bit more depth to it, especially over here on the left side. But a back pin right location is absolutely devilish. Hole 12 is 506, one of the longer par 4s on property, and as you'd expect, an absolute beast. It plays into the prevailing wind that you get coming in from the west, and not fun on days where you're dealing with a ton of wind. You'll see triples there all the time. Hole 13 is 624, an extremely long par 5. So you can see out here, right, even the quote-unquote scoreable holes are going to be difficult. Now, you'll see a lot of players hitting it just in front of the screen in 2. You're not going to see many actually get it to the green complex. There's a little bit of a valley effect here, so a lot of your layups you have to hit down into the valley, and it's also an extremely hard fairway to hit even for your layup. So that's why a lot of people go for it in 2, right? Even if you're going to leave it like 30, 40 yards short, they'd rather have a shot out of the rough from like 30, 40 yards than that same kind of shot from 110 yards. So you'll see a lot of aggressive plays here at number 13, but unless it's playing downwind, which the prevailing wind does go downwind, so you'll see that quite a bit, it's going to be pretty much impossible to reach, even for your super long players. Hole 14 is 437. This is a slight dogleg from right to left. It's a more scoreable hole, right? It's only 437, right? Compared to those 500-yard par fours, a little bit of a break, but still not an absolute snack. You've got to hit the fairway to set up that birdie look, and it's a tiny green complex. And if you go long, you're in a ravine, so good luck there. Hole 15 is 518, super long par 4. Not much has to be said. There's trees that can block you out here. If you hit it to the left, it's almost a for sure layup over here. Just trying to put yourself back in position. You miss to the right, it's some super lush rough. So a real difficult hole just to make a par on. Hole 16 is 228. Again, another longer par 3. An absolute beast of a hole. Once again, not much that has to be said. It's a long iron in. It plays into the prevailing wind that you get for a lot of rounds, which would make this hole even more difficult. Hole 17 is 443. This little ravine down the left, a lot of people will bail out to the right in these fairway bunkers. If you miss in the fairway bunkers, it leaves you like 160 yards, maybe even 170 yards. If you're back here in the first bunker, which to a larger green, I would say it's one of the more lenient greens that we have on the entire property. But still, if you're out of position, everything on this course is just difficult. Hole 18 is 572. It's a par 5, so it is a scoreable look, but the second shot is difficult, right? You've got this lake to worry about. A lot of shots seem to end up in this lake over here. They've got a name for it, somebody that hit it in the lake like over and over again. I'm sure they'll talk about it on the broadcast like 6 times, so you'll know the name of it by the end of the week. But it's usually a layup hole for a lot of players. The tee shot is real narrow, so it's not easy to hit the short stuff. If you can hit it in the short stuff, you'll have a decision to make on whether to go for it. A lot of that will come down to wind direction, right? Whether it's helping or hurting you out there, and then your position in the golf tournament, right? If you're chasing, you're probably going for it in 2, right? Trying to make a little something happen. If you're winning by 2 shots there on Sunday, you're 100% laying up. So it's an interesting hole. It brings a lot of strategy into play. It's the most iconic hole around the Torrey Pines, and where you're going to see a championship type moment happen come Sunday here at the Farmers. Anytime we get a major championship type of test, our key stats are going to be focused on the ball striking aspect of things, right? And as you saw from that hole by hole breakdown, it's a lot going to come down to approach play. So when I'm looking through the custom model over here for the Farmers Insurance Open, courtesy of Bet the Number, you'll see that they have the approach from 175 to 275 in there. A lot of that is for your par 3s, longer par 4s, and of course your approaches on the long par 5s. But then they also have this 75 to 140 range, right? There were a few holes out there that were scoreable. I'm much more involved with this longer tier range, as that's where you're really going to give away the golf tournament. And unlike the last few weeks where we're focused on guys making birdies, this kind of week is a lot more about just avoiding the blowups, right? Avoiding those doubles, triples that you're going to see at the South Course. So I love this 175 to 275 range. Some of the leaders in that category include Rico Hoey, who of course went out there, was the first round leader from last week, or near first round leader, I should say. Just absolute stud, hits the ball country mile. It's a small sample, but you can see off the tee is a huge flusher. At least from 175 to 275 has been a plus player. Again, small sample, so take it with a grain of salt, but that's cool to see. Ches Reavie, we know he flushes it with those long irons. JJ Spawn, who's a local San Diego guy, I'm out there for college. That's interesting. Joel Damon, always a flusher with the long irons. Charlie Hoffman, David Lipsky, Matt Neesmith up there. In terms of some of your top tier players, right? Steven Yeager popping. That's not surprising. He's been known for that his entire career. Luke List, winner at this event. Somebody that I hit on for an outright here. So some good vibes with Luke List around this track for sure. You got Sunjay M up there, top tier player. Alex Smalley, flusher with those long irons. But not a lot of those top 5, top 10s in your outright odds. So that's interesting. Ball speed is where you're going to see a lot of those top-end players. Ball speed is important with that long 4-inch rough. My number 1 key stat is going to be that approach play, right? Really emphasizing the long iron shots. Number 2 is going to be ball speed. And it's not really driving distance I'm looking at. It's not even that driving accuracy that I think we're going to incorporate here at some point. But ball speed is the most important metric. It'll get you out of the rough. It obviously equates to that distance. And when you have those long par 3s, you're going to be hitting shorter clubs in compared to your other players. So a few players to look out for. Minwoo, right? We know he's one of the longest players in the world, right? So he's always worth a few looks. Something to note with Minwoo is he's also an exceptional par 5 player. So you have to think that he's exceptionally skilled with the long irons. And on top of that, he's a player that's insanely good around the green. You can see the stats here don't really reflect that because of the sample size, but around the green last week, he was an absolute magician. So I think he's somebody to keep an eye on. Cam Champ's a flusher. Jake Knapp hits the ball a long mile. You see that he's pretty good around the green too. Alejandro Tosti, Callum Turan. Let's find some of these top tier players. Gary Woodland. Interesting. Hope, obviously still coming back from being off for a while, but, everyone rooting for him out there. Ludwig Aberg with ball speed. You got Nikolai Hogard here. Just, you want to look for the guys that can extract it out of that rough. Next key stat you want to consider, right, especially if you're looking for winners, top fives this week, is you need somebody that's going to pop on POA. And Jason Day, right, didn't really show up on ball speed, right, didn't really show up out there from 175 to 275, but his track record around here, and I guess I didn't mean to fully click him there. My apologies. Let's bring that back up. His track record around here, he has a top 7 last year. 2 years ago, finished T3. Has a T5 back there in 2019. I believe may have actually won this golf tournament, a long time ago when he was in his prime. He loves this golf course because of the greens, right? And if you take a look at the POA stats, that's where he shines, right? Somebody like Keegan Bradley, who finished 2nd last year, had a 5th back there in 2018, is a player that loves this POA. Sahith Theegala, right? T25 2 years ago, T4 last year, a player that gets it done on the POA. Another way to get to your ceiling this week is to just make all those par putts, right? Get those 15, 25 footers and make them for birdie. Max Homa shows up in this category. Xander Schauffele, right, local guy who's had a pretty decent track record here, right, also shows up in that category. Somebody like Seamus Power, Harry Hall, a few other shout outs. Sunjay Im keeps showing up. He's going to be a potential lock this week. And Colin Morikawa, surprisingly, right, has done his best work on POA. He played golf out there west at Cal, so not that surprising. A T21 and a T3 finish, including shots gained putting. That it's into the positive in both events. Now, it's not like he gained like 4 or 5 strokes or anything like that, but anytime he's even into the positive in that category, it's something to keep an eye on. So you want that mix of putting and elite level ball striking, and a few names that stand out to me are Sunjay Im, right? I mentioned him as fitting pretty much every category, and then Colin Morikawa really stands out to me. Now, I'm going to be doing my bets video, my core plays video a little bit later, but there's a good chance I'm investing in Colin Morikawa outright. So we'll see if I actually fire the outright there, but his form's been there, right? Won the Zozo, 5th at the Century, 7th at the Hero World Challenge, T6 of the Tour Championship, and seemingly fits this golf course quite well. Max Homa is a pretty decent iron player, but also loves that POA. Sahith Theegala has been striping it of late, so, with that track record on approach at the Century, was decent at the Sony. He might be worth a few looks. Keegan, we know he's a really solid approach player. I mean, look at his last 2 events, right? 4 shots gained approach, 3.6 at the Century. He's going to be a gainer on POA. All of these players are worth looking at. Now, Jason Day, not the best on approach of late, but just based on the fact that he's printed money at this golf course over the years, might be worth a few looks as well. In terms of just your pure approach stats, right, not filtering it based on anything, you got guys like Bjork at the top, who's an absolute flusher. Sam Ryder, that's why he's number 1 in the modeling this week. Number 2 is Colin Morikawa. Love that. Again, he just shows up everywhere this week. Gary Woodland, so if everyone's rooting for him, he's flushing it of late. A lot of that is before he came back, though, so you got to take that with a grain of salt. Xander Schauffele, hometown kid, okay. Eric Cole didn't show up in a lot of these other categories, but still hitting the ball well in approach. Always worth a few looks there. Adam Svensson, you got Alex Smalley here, right? We mentioned he's a flusher with the irons. Didn't show up in a lot of the other categories, but anytime you have these elite level ball strikers at a course that requires ball striking, they're going to get my attention. Hideki seems to be rounding into approach form. You have somebody like JJ Spawn here, right? They're gaining over half a stroke per round. Cantlay, we already knew he'd be up there. Keegan, Nikolai Hogard. Names worth a few looks this week. So just to kind of recap everything here with the key stats, you want your long iron approach play. You obviously going to be looking at the distance, ball speed numbers to get out of that rough. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, right, especially for your non-ball strikers, putting on POA. It's been extremely correlated to success. And again, if we sort this by POA, it's just top 5, top 10s galore up there with a lot of these players. All right, now let's look at some comps. And the first one I want to look at here is the home of the Zozo Championship, Accordia Golf Narashino, which is a ball striking test unlike any other that we've seen. So let's go ahead, just sort it by the last 2 years when they've been playing at this golf course. And you'll see that it's played extremely difficult, right? Only 3.32 birdies per round made and and 2.6 bogeys per round, which the bogey number a little bit lower than what you're going to have here at the Torrey Pines South course, but the birdies per round is also lower, right, than what we get at Torrey Pines. Part of that because it's a par 70, but in terms of the ball striking test, it's very similar across both tracks. There's a lot of shorter par 4s that we have around Accordia Golf Narracino that are in the 320 to 350 range, and then a lot of longer par 4s, which is where you see the bogeys and lack of birdies come in. There's a lot of those 450 to 500 yard holes. You have that lush rough out there in Japan, and the green complexes are among the most difficult in the entire world. The agronomy in Japan is top notch, some of the best agronomy teams that you have in existence. You have the fastest greens that these players play on pretty much all year, and a lot of slope out there at Accordia Golf Narracino as well. So the around the green shots are difficult. The ball striking is at least somewhat comparable to what we get this week. Unfortunately, no shots gained metrics right over there on the other side of the world. But if you're looking at the leaderboard success, a lot of crossover that I think we're going to see. And just looking at this leaderboard, right, Colin Morikawa towards the top, once again showing up. It's going to be a thing, it looks like, right, playing him this week. Minwoo, right, over there in T6. T6 for a JJ Spawn is also very interesting. Emiliano Grillo, Cam Davis, Sungjae Im, right, showing up once again. All players that probably are worth a little bit of extra attention this week. Next up, we're going to go to the Quail Hollow Club. So we're going to go and find the Wells Fargo Championship. And that's another huge ball striking test, right? It's one of the longer courses that we have on the PGA Tour, that lush like 4 or 5 inch rough. You can see it's a par 71, so not the par 72 that we have this week, but 7,538 yards, right? So an extremely long track. Your fairway percentage is only about 55%. If you look at our green regulation percentage, it's there at 61%. Now, a few times they've played at Wells Fargo, it hasn't been at the Quail Hollow Club. So I'm going to go ahead and just only sort it from last year, right, just for the sake of this. But look at this, 3 bogeys per round, pretty comparable to this week. Only 3.44 birdies per round, also very comparable to this week. Scrambling percentage, lower than what we're used to seeing. And while the agronomy is different, right, it's not on POA, different part of the country, all of that's true. A lot of the different elevation changes that you have at Torrey Pines, you're going to see out there at this course. A lot of the same type of greens with a lot of undulation. They're also really fast out there at Quail Hollow because of all the trees. It can kind of protect you from the wind. So it looks different, right? You've got a lot more tree cover out there at the Wells Fargo. But from the ball striking perspective, right, both extremely long courses, a lot of challenging, demanding par 3s, and not a lot of birdies made and a whole lot of bogeys mixed in. So I thought that that was a pretty good ball striking test, and one that you can use for a comparison as well. And now lastly, the one that is probably the most different or the most outside the box in terms of my comps is going to be the home of the Palmetto Championship. So it's Congaree Golf Club. I've been there a few times myself. It's a kind of course that you want to visit at some point in your life. It's truly one of a kind, I would say. There's nothing out there that's comparable to it. So we have the stats loaded in from the CJ Cup that are going to show up here, and then also the Palmetto Championship, which was also at the same course here. So in terms of your birdies per round, it's here at 3.4, which is, again, right in that same range that we have at all these different tracks. The bogeys per round are a little bit lower. If we were to sort this by only the CJ Cup last year, I think it's going to get even more difficult. Maybe not. That's right. So the field strength at the CJ Cup was a little bit stronger this time around. So we'll include both of them just for the sake of this. Your fairway percentage a little bit higher, but your green regulation percentage not that high in really difficult greens, right? A lot of 3-putts like what we're going to have for this week, and your scrambling percentage a little bit lower than your tour average. The ball striking stuff at CJ Cup is all long iron shots. Your par 3s are a mile long. Heck, even your par 4s are like 500 yards all over the place. You get a little bit more rollout of the CJ Cup, right? Larger landing areas than what you get at the other 2 tracks. But driving distance, that distance factor, comes in on this leaderboard. I mean, look at this, right? Rory won, for goodness sakes, right? Kurt Kitayama hits it a country mile. Cade Chalee is not a sleeper when it comes to off the tee. Tommy Fleetwood, John Rahm, Aaron Wise, Sam Burns, Lee Hodges. Everyone up here, pretty much except for Brendan Todd and Billy Horschel, were absolute flushers of the golf ball. I mean, Jay Day, Cam Davis, Matt Fitzpatrick, Terrell Haddon, all players that gain with their distance to the field. And then you can see that iron play, right? And if we were to sort this field by long iron play, you'd see guys like Tommy Fleetwood towards the top of the board. Tony Finau as well, but he did not show up on this leaderboard. But guys like John Rahm, obviously some of the best long iron players in the world. Kurt Kitayama, that's where he gains a lot of his shots gained approach. Tom Kim, right, known for that long iron play. Same thing with the Matty Fitz, Cam Davis. That's why I like a lot of the crossover there. So kind of like what you have with Quail Hollow, the agronomy is completely different. Again, completely different part of the country. I would say, again, the most outside the box kind of comp that we're looking at. But if you're looking for a truly long track, right, it's par 71, nearly 7,700 yards. There's not a bunch of those on tour, right? Where you're going to have a course that's that demanding when it comes to the length. So a lot of the crossover there, just in terms of the birdie difficulty and a leaderboard that you can look to for a little bit of that crossover. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for the course breakdown this week. I appreciate all your support here on the channel. Go ahead, smash that like button for me on your way out of here, and also comment down below what you've got as your winning score for this golf tournament. If you end up getting the exact number, go ahead, win a free month of my Patreon. Last week we didn't have any winners on that end, but this time around, go ahead and let me know your thoughts. I appreciate the support here, like I said. Best of luck with all those outrights, any DFS exposure that you're getting to, and keep an eye out for the rest of my content this week. Later on today, we'll have a DFS and betting preview dropping. Of course, our weekly live stream will be Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time because of an early start this week on Wednesday. They're not trying to compete with the NFL football on Sunday, so the last few years, we've gotten this event from a Wednesday through a Saturday, and frankly, as somebody that is a fan of both sports, it makes my life a little bit easier and gives us a better chance to watch all of the action. So I'm hyped for it. Make sure you remember to set your lineups, get your bets in there before Wednesday, and I'll see you guys for the rest of the content throughout the week.